Welcome to Selected Ambient Rumors. I'm Bora. Today, I have a story from 1882. Louis Salome was a figure who caused a profound shift in both Friedrich Nietzsche's life and his philosophy. I'll tell you about the last evening Nietzsche saw her. By the way, we're continuing to upload videos regularly. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's get started. Nietzsche, Paul Rie, and Louis Salome had reached the end of their night in Leipzig. The trio had drunk exactly 3 bottles of wine at a wooden table in a tavern steeped in the scent of wine. They were drunk. When the bill arrived at the table, Nietzsche stood up to pull money from his pocket. But then he saw the bill and couldn't believe his eyes. The total was 6 marks. It was robbery. Indeed, for that time, it was a significant amount. Wretched people, filthy rabble. How dare they do this? Have they no shame? He cursed inwardly. Nietzsche only had 60 pfennigs in loose change in his pocket. He stood there, hand in his pocket, frozen. If he took his hand out, it would reveal how little money he had, and it felt as though all his dignity at that table would vanish. Money buys respect, but the will to pursue your own values, human, creates respect, he would say. But right now, his values couldn't pay the bill. He couldn't fall into this situation in front of the woman he loved. Yes, he still had feelings for Lou. A few months earlier, Paul Rie had introduced Nietzsche to Louis Salome. Like all the intellectual men of that era, he was deeply captivated by her. She was a young, very charming woman with a rare level of intellect for her time. Nietzsche had shocked everyone by proposing marriage to her. Lou rejected Nietzsche's proposal. Nietzsche didn't even want to see her face anymore. However, this trio's intellectual friendship meant a lot to Paul Rie. Paul Rie was also a respected intellectual of the time, a polite man interested in moral philosophy. He loved Nietzsche dearly, but wasn't as radical as him. To break the ice, Paul had brought Lou along to Leipzig, where Nietzsche was staying at the time, and he had organized this night. Nietzsche had been tense all evening. Every time he looked at Lou, he felt ashamed of himself. Just as he was about to be released from this torturing evening, the issue of the bill came up. At that time, Nietzsche had been forced to abandon his professorship due to health issues. He was barely surviving. He didn't have a home. He lived as a wanderer, staying only in cheap boarding houses and hotel rooms. Paul understood his situation. Turning to Nietzsche, he politely asked, "Would you like me to pay, Friedrich?" Nietzsche was furious. How could he humiliate him like that? He knew all too well that Paul was a slave to his father's money. Wasn't he ashamed to use his father's money to belittle Nietzsche in front of the woman he loved? There was a moment of silence. Realizing Nietzsche tensed up at the offer, Paul turned to Lou to deflect the attention, saying, "Of course, I'd love to treat you too, Lou." Lou tilted her head slightly, a flirtatious smile appearing on her face. At that moment, Lou made an unexpected move, saying, "Thank you, sweetie. Actually, you know what? I'd like to pay tonight. I've hurt both of you lately. Consider this an apology." Nietzsche's anger deepened even further. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Who did she think she was to assume she could hurt Nietzsche? And then, to top it off, try to crush him with her money. Like Paul, Lou was also a slave to her father's wealth. When Nietzsche worked at the university, he had both a salary and status. In those days, they wouldn't have dared show him any disrespect. Were they now bold enough to insult him because he no longer had money or status? Yes, perhaps Nietzsche had no money, but he was freer than ever. That was what truly deserved respect. But these two were too foolish to understand that freedom was worth more respect than money or status. More importantly, what did she mean by, "I've hurt both of you"? Was she implying she had rejected Paul too? A seed of suspicion, one that could easily grow and bear fruit, sprouted in Nietzsche's mind. Was there something between the two of them? Judging by their behavior and closeness, it didn't seem like she had rejected him. They were too cowardly to admit it and vile enough to use money to cover it up. Nietzsche slowly pulled his hand from his pocket, his fist clenched tightly around his last coins. With his other hand, he picked up the bill and held it in the air. "Look at this disgrace," he said, waving the bill as he began. "This is it. This is the greatest proof that morality has completely collapsed in this society. This is the new god of the weak in this society. They worship it now. Their old gods have abandoned them. They try to fill the void they've fallen into with money. By robbing us, no less." The tavern keeper, a long-bearded, grumpy old German, turned and glared at them, trying to stay calm as he said, "If you don't quiet down, I'll add 1 mark to the bill." Paul was tense, even scared. For some strange reason, the situation seemed to amuse Lou even more. Paul said, "All right, Friedrich, forget it. I'll take care of it." Nietzsche shot back. "It's not about you paying, Paul. It's about the fact that neither of you has the courage to stand up to these corrupt people robbing you." Lou couldn't hold back and said to Nietzsche, "You're taking this bill so seriously, Nietzsche. If you hate money that much, why don't you give your books away for free?" Then, tilting her head down, she muttered to herself, "Maybe then someone would actually read them." Nietzsche found himself thinking, even if I gave them away for free, I'd still only make this much. Her thoughts about his books not being read stung, but what really turned his stomach was her belittling him with money that wasn't even hers. Lou had built her entire life philosophy around freedom. That's why she had rejected Nietzsche's marriage proposal. She had said she didn't want anything that would restrict her freedom. "No matter what, I'll live my own free life. Marriage is the murderer of freedom," she'd say. Nietzsche turned to her and said, "If you're so obsessed with freedom, then reject your father's money." In truth, that sentence wasn't entirely relevant to the situation, but that's how it goes sometimes. The things we hold inside just spill out unexpectedly. Lou tensed up. Paul, with an insincere smile, said, "All right, calm down. Let's end this evening on a good mood." His peacemaking attitude drove Nietzsche mad. Lou jumped in. "What do you mean, Friedrich?" Nietzsche replied, "Is it a lie? Both of you are slaves to your family's money, especially you. You go around preaching freedom, but you do it under the wings of your father's wealth. If you don't want to be tied to anything, then don't be tied to your father's money either. Aren't you ashamed to lecture people about freedom?" And in a fit of rage, he downed the last glass of wine on the table. Lou looked at Nietzsche and suddenly burst into laughter. Nietzsche didn't understand what was happening. Paul joined in with a subtle chuckle under his mustache. "Lou, stop laughing," said. "Clean that mustache, you tipsy philosopher. It's covered in red." Nietzsche's mustache was soaked, with red wine dripping from it. As Lou kept laughing, she took a handkerchief and wiped Nietzsche's mustache. The tavern keeper shouted away, chuckling. "All right, you made me laugh. I'll give you a 30 pfennig discount." Lou's hand coming so close to Nietzsche's face left him stunned. That touch, the anger from her mocking him, the thoughts swirling in his head, the drunkenness from that last glass. It all mixed together. Taking advantage of his silence, Lou spoke up. "Why should my father's money restrict my freedom? On the contrary, that money is what gives me my freedom. Thanks to it, we're drinking here." Paul chimed in, "Yeah, let's not exaggerate the money thing. It's just something that helps us get by." At that, Lou flashed Paul a flirtatious smile. Nietzsche was done. "You two get along so well. Clearly, your thoughts are as pathetic as each other. I wish you happiness," he said. Lou became angry. "Why are our thoughts pathetic? Fine then, great philosopher. I assume you wouldn't let pathetic minds treat you to drinks. You're free to pay the bill," she said, leaning back and crossing her legs. Nietzsche was first deeply embarrassed. Then he went mad at Lou's cruelty. She's doing this, knowing full well he didn't have the money to cover the bill, was despicable. "In fact, you two should just get married. You're already used to being slaves to a family. You'd thrive in marriage," he said. Lou started smirking wickedly and said, "Wait a second, are you saying bad things about marriage right now, or am I imagining it?" From Nietzsche's drunken mouth came the words, "Marriage is the Christian morality's way of restricting our freedom." Lou couldn't hold back and burst into laughter. "Didn't you propose to me just 3 months ago? You didn't think that back then, did you? Or did your grand philosophy change in 3 months?" she said. Nietzsche wanted to sink into the ground from shame. The three of them hadn't spoken about the marriage proposal since that day. They acted as if it never happened. This was the first time it was thrown in his face. All his anger toward Lou turned inward. How had he put himself in the position of proposing to such a cruel, despicable woman? What was he doing here? Why had he drunk so much? Why had he said that last sentence? He grew quiet and withdrew into himself. He slowly placed his coins on the table. His hand, almost involuntarily, reached for Paul's wine glass. He took a big gulp of wine. Without looking into their eyes, he began muttering to himself. "This is all I have," he said. Paul, with a sad tone, asked, "Are you okay, Friedrich?" "I'm fine. All I need right now is to get back to my books," he replied. The tavern keeper shouted mockingly, "You can't pay the bill with books." Nietzsche stared at him. Paul quickly turned to the tavern keeper and said, all right, don't worry." Nietzsche realized Paul pitied him. He'd rather die than have someone pity him. But he didn't have the strength for that. He silently stood up from the table and said, "Goodbye." Lou and Paul thought it best to leave him alone. They didn't know that this was the last time they'd see Nietzsche. As Nietzsche walked through the dark streets toward his hotel room, his consciousness half gone, the only thing he felt was despair. But he took pleasure in it, because to him, hope always prolonged the torment. Whenever he sank fully into despair, his most powerful ideas would bloom, and now was one of those times. It was impossible for him to make these corrupt people, these slaves to money, this rabble with not a shred of their own values, understand him. They didn't read his books, and when he spoke, they didn't listen. With these thoughts, he entered his room. On the table were the drafts of his book, The Gay Science, which he'd been working on in those days. He sat down at the drafts and began scribbling. In the morning, he woke up with an unbearable headache. He could barely remember the end of the night. How he got home, what he did when he got there, he didn't know. He found the writings from the night before on the table. He picked them up, read them, and his eyes widened. He was astonished. Centuries later, people would remember him for the phrase that appeared there for the first time, "God is dead." It was the story of a madman telling people that God was no longer there, that the old world had been destroyed, and that now everyone had to become their own god. But the people didn't understand him. The story of the madman was in his hands.